Well, today I have a great writer, a great critic, excellent talk show host, Michael Riedel. Maybe his first appearance since, well, it's been a while. It's been a few months, I think, on my program anyway. Michael, how are you?
Good, Ralph. I'm fine. Yeah, we lost our show sadly at WOR back in November. Budget cuts, but such is life in the fickle world of broadcasting.
Talk radio. Radio is so strange the way you're here one day and gone tomorrow. It's the strangest thing in the world. I don't know any other business quite. They don't explain anything to anybody. Nobody knows anything. The listeners have no idea what's gone on. We're in the dark here, Michael.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Listen, I mean, I'm not privy to those kind of decisions, but when the axe swings and it hits you, you got to figure out what you're going to do next. And I'm sort of trying to figure that out. In fact, maybe you can give me advice in podcasting since you seem to be doing very well with podcasting.
Well, this is actually a radio show slash podcast. So, we got the best of both worlds here. I'll tell you about a podcast. You got the goofiest guys out there and women. Don't want to leave them out. They have the strangest people sometimes do so well in this weird world that we're in. I can't understand it. But some people, they just talk. And to me, it's like watching paint dry. And they have subscribers out of the ordinary. It just comes and comes and comes. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm a big fan of the BBC, and they have some really terrific shows and some great podcasts. And I don't really think, honestly, here in America, we have anything that is as good as what they're doing. In fact, I listen to a lot of old podcasts or a lot of old radio shows that are now repurposed as podcasts. But I was just listening to one this morning that was terrific. The BBC did back in the early 2000s, and it was called Great Lives. And they would bring a celebrity on, and the celebrity would say, it could be a writer, an actor,
Hmm.
director, whoever, broadcaster. And they say, this person had a great life and I want to talk for half an hour about the life of this person. And then they would bring on somebody who had written maybe a biography of the person or someone who had been related to the person. The only stipulation is, and this is why I can't put you on Great Lives, Ralph, is you have to be dead. So, yeah.
I don't qualify yet.
But I was just listening to one the other day. I mean, they had somebody brought on Fred Astaire, a great life
Wow.
that he led, and that was absolutely fascinating. They had Fred Astaire's biographer on. John Major, the former British Prime Minister, was talking about Rudyard Kipling, the poet and the short story writer. So I find all that stuff really rich, and it's a good way to pass the time when you don't have 4 hours to fill by yourself on a radio show.
And I just remember how you'd have to hit those breaks very, very orderly. You'd have someone that's riveting on the air. You had a great guest, and then we have to say goodbye. And that's the one thing about radio that drives me crazy. This is long format sometimes. The
Yeah,
the
yeah.
podcast you can go on forever. The Rogan podcast, which is the most popular, I think it's still the most popular, or one of. They go on for 4 hours sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are some podcasts that are a little self-indulgent, and I don't
Yeah.
I don't need 4 hours of that. But I got to hand it to my former boss, Tom Cuddy, who hired me at WOR. I could always talk. I mean, I'd been on TV with Theater Talk for many years, interviewing people, but that was not live, and you could edit stuff out, and we would often go over the 25-minute allotted time we had on
Yeah.
PBS, but you cut it. But Tom really taught me the mechanics of radio, which is you have to learn how, when you're live on the show and your break is at, let's say 8:16, you have to be attuned to that. And you cannot ask somebody a complicated question and give them a minute to answer it. You've got to know when to wrap it up and find that moment that you can put a button on it. And it took me a long time to do it. And in the beginning, I made a lot of mistakes. I would get into the conversation with somebody and I want to probe more and push them
Yeah.
along a little bit more. And all of a sudden you're out of time. So, I mean, I really had to learn how to keep the eye on the clock, get the meat up front. And then I always said, you got to find, because I come from the showbiz world, so you got to put a button on things. I always felt you had to put a button on an interview. It had to be wrapped up in some way. generally what I like to do was with a little bit of a sense of humor. No matter how pointed the conversation could be, I like to end it on a little upbeat note and at least give the guest a laugh. We all have a little laugh as we go on, as we get out.
That's what I like about your style. You know, no matter how serious the subject matter, you always found humor in it. And I try to do that. That's just my personality. But you know, how could you? You know, the morning program has a different feel. People are waking up, they're getting ready, they have it on while they're doing things. So you have to have that mentality. Yes.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we really tried to do, we had some terrific correspondence from WABC all around the world. I mean, there was not a subject that we couldn't cover. We had a correspondent there. But I always felt, and I did learn this from working with Don Imus all the years I was a regular on his show. I felt the listeners need to get to know the correspondents, not just as people who read a report, but as human beings. And so we would take the time to try to get to know who the correspondent was and have a little chemistry and a little fun with the correspondent. So they became part of our morning show family. So it wasn't just, all right, now we're going to get a report from Israel, from God, I can't remember her name now. Um,
Yeah, I know her name too. I can't think of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Jordan.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It's fine. I've been off the radio now for so long. I've lost
Yeah,
my
it's something Jordan, this young lady there. Yeah.
Jordana Miller. Jordana Miller.
Yes, yes, yes.
But it was all about, okay, we're covering a very serious issue here. Israel is at war with Hezbollah and Hamas. But we would often take the time with Jordana to say, Jordana, what is your daily life like? She had two young kids. What's it like to be raising two kids when air sirens are going off and you
Mhm.
may have to go down to a bunker? So we were always conscious of trying to make people to make the correspondence human and not just reading from a script. I think we succeeded at that, actually. And
No
then
doubt about it.
other people we could have fun with. You can't have a lot of laughs when you may have to go down to a bunker because Hamas is going to lob a bomb your direction. But we would have fun with some of the political correspondence and this, that, and the other thing. So I mean, I always
No,
tried to. My feeling was always for a morning radio show, got to give people the news. They're getting up
yeah.
in the morning. They got to know what happened, but you've got to give them some humor. I mean, it was Imus who said to me, people are going from difficult lives to difficult jobs. You got to give them news and you got to give them some laughs along the way. And that's what we tried to do.
You're sleeping in now. Now you can sleep till 6 o'clock.
It's funny. I still get up. I still get up at
Do you really?
I do. I
That
mean,
inner time clock, that alarm clock.
I know. I mean, I did it for 8 years. So 4:30 in the morning, I'm up and my wife is like, would you get out of the effing bed? You're tossing and turning the whole time. So now I get up and I go read, I read Balzac and I'm reading Albert Speer's Spandau Prison Diaries. And of course, he was Hitler's architect, and some
Wow.
a book on the shelf for years. And it's absolutely fascinating book. I mean, the man was right there. He had an eyewitness to World War II, eyewitness to what Hitler was like. And I started reading it the other night because I couldn't. I got up at 4:30 in the morning, nothing to do, and I said, okay, well, why not read a prison diary from an ex-Nazi?
Why not?
Why not?
This
And I
is
started reading.
as good a time as any.
I'm telling you, Ralph. I mean, I was told. I read for 2 hours this morning. I was completely gripped by it. Who would think you've got nothing to do in prison except he makes it fascinating?
I'm reading a book right now. You say that the show won't go on, which is
Oh,
from my friend Bert. You've had Bert Kearns on your show. I've had Bert. Do you remember Bert Kearns with the Marlon
dude.
Brando
Yeah, yeah,
bio?
yeah.
This is a great book. And again, the hours go by. You turn around, you start at 9 o'clock, you turn around, it's midnight, and you can't get over that you've spent 3 hours on that book if it's a good book.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
But
now
I always felt too with the radio. I knew a show would work because we had 4 hours, 6 to 10. And let's face it, you've done early morning radio. I was like, oh my God, I got to haul myself in there. I'm tired, and we're all kind of wiping the sleep out of our eyes, but we got to be up. And most of the time, I would have to say, the 4 hours where you thought, oh my God, I've got to do this for 4 hours in the morning. If you were in the right rhythm and having a good time with my co-host Len, whom I just loved, still do. I had dinner with him not too long ago. Sometimes you look up, you think, okay, it's 6 o'clock. I got 4 hours, and then you look up and it's 10 o'clock, and Hours flew by.
Yeah. Yeah,
Flew by.
you're in the zone. You're in the zone. You're not thinking of time, and that's a good thing. We're so aware of the time all the time, and you lose yourself for that 4 hours.
Right.
I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I know, and my wife misses you on the radio. She says hi. Cindy says hi, and we miss you in the morning. And do you miss it? That's what I have to ask you. I'm not going to ask you the legal stuff and what kind of
Yeah.
circumstance surrounds that. Do you miss it? Can you say, I miss that?
Oh no, absolutely. I know. I absolutely miss it. I mean, I miss the wonderful people I worked with. I miss Len, talking to Len every day. I miss our wonderful producer Natalie and Crash, who was our sound man. I miss the family that we created. I miss my friends who were regulars. I would get to talk to Larry Hackett, the former editor of People magazine, Laura Curran, former Nassau County executive, Jordana Miller, Steve Roberts from ABC News. We put together, and I did this really deliberately with Natalie and Len. I said, let's put together a family, a team, and the listeners get to know them. And in the course of, and a lot of these people I never met, of course, are on the radio, and they're in Washington or in Israel or in London, wherever they are. But we all got to be really quite friendly. And it was always fun. I would always jump on the phone before we started the segment with them. Um, and we developed these nice friendships. And I think that's what I miss the most. I miss having at your disposal incredibly smart people, great reporters, know what they're talking about, but also have a sense of humor. And I would learn something from them with every segment. With every segment, I would learn something from Steve Roberts' analysis of what was going on in the Democratic Party, from Jordana, what was going on in Israel. Larry Hackett had tremendous insight into the entertainment business. So for me, as the interviewer, I never wanted to be someone who, oh, well, I know more than you do. I know more than this. I wanted to be the person who says, I'm asking the questions because I don't know, but you
Mm,
know, and I'm going
mm.
to learn. And in this, 8-minute interview, I'm going to learn a tremendous amount from you.
Some of these guests are still on in the morning. Some probably took off because you were not there anymore. And here's the thing that they did. Now I'll throw this in. You don't have to respond, but I'll tell you exactly what happened there. They wouldn't take phone calls from listeners. They wouldn't involve the listeners for fear that someone would say, "Where's Michael and Where's Michael and Berman? Where are these guys? What happened?" So forever they didn't take a phone call. Finally, Mente took a phone call months after you were gone, and I noticed that they try to cover everything up and sweep it under the rug, and it doesn't work that way. We're smart. We're smart at home, listening to you too.
Right. Well,
You know what I mean? We're smarter than they think.
it's not my show anymore. It's Larry's show. And listen, I have nothing but the utmost respect for Larry. He was our anchor man for a year and a half or so when I was there, and a great guy. And Larry and I had a lot of fun. And I remember, Len would go on vacation, and I would co-host the show with Larry, and we always had a good time. We always had a good time. For me, being the host of a radio show, I wanted to make everybody. My goal was what I thought Imus did so well, especially at his height. I wanted to make the listeners feel that they could walk into the studio and sit with us and be part of the show, that they could chime in, they could talk to us. We were not these people who were above it all. We were
Mhm.
not, fancy radio performers. We were just guys talking and learning stuff every day and having some laughs. And my goal was always, and this is what I felt, when I listened to Imus before I started going on Imus, I always remember listening in the morning. I thought I could walk right into that studio and sit with that crowd with Rob Bartlett and Bernie McGurk and Lou Rufino, that whole crowd, and I could just join in with the fun. And that was the kind of atmosphere that we tried to create on our show. Anybody's welcome. Come on in and just join in the fun because most of the time we had no clue what we were doing. We were just
That's
flying by the
that's the
seat.
way. Well, I
For,
had a feeling of spontaneity with you guys. Not
yeah,
everything was all, scripted. I had a feeling you were really, in the moment kind of thing, as an actor would say, in
we
the in
never
the in the moment.
No, we
Yeah.
never worked from a script ever. I mean, it was, and and Len and I, all we're great friends and we always got along. But I was the Republican, he was the Democrat, so sometimes you had to allow for there to be some combustibility, and there was at times where Len would get mad at a position that I took, or Len would be very upset about something that Trump did, or I'd be very upset about something that the Democrats were doing. And you would have to allow that confrontation, that explosion to happen. But that's life too. You can still be friendly. And the point of the show too was that Len and I disagreed with each other politically, but we didn't hate each other. We liked
Mm,
each other. And
mm.
we were coming together at a time when the country was so polarized, where, I had dear friends who would not speak to me because I'm a Republican.
Mm.
Um, I patched those up over the years, but I always said to them, I said, look, my politics are my politics. It should have nothing to do with our relationship, with our friendship, and we can have a spirited disagreement about things. And then when it's over with, we can have a laugh because we're friends. And Len and I always had that in mind, that we could have a fight, and sometimes we had some pretty tense moments on the show. But we always knew how to deflect it and then find the way out with humor, and then you move on to the next segment where everybody takes a break, and we're at the bar having a drink together and we're still friends.
I noticed that 7 o'clock, you're at each other's throats, and about 9 o'clock,
Yeah.
everything's hunky dory.
At that point we're totally drunk, and so we're
And
just we've been at the bar all morning and we're fine. That's right.
and that's the way it should be, you know? What are we doing? 50, you're so right. We're at odds constantly. And you were the safe haven there in the morning. But now if someone offered you a job, maybe you have some offers, would you go back?
Oh yeah, I'd go back to radio in a second. I love radio. I grew up with radio. I mean, I'm a radio kid, even though I was a newspaperman for years. My earliest memories, I had an old boxy radio in my 40 Lima Road,
Hmm.
Geneseo, New York, where I grew up. And on Sunday nights, I think it was, could have been Saturdays or Sundays, I listened to E.G. Marshall, CBS Radio Mystery Theater. I mean, and that's why I fell in love with the radio. To me, it was better than television. E.G. That door would open.
Yes.
And welcome to the CBS Radio Mystery Theater.
Yeah.
And then you would hear these fabulous playlists about the supernatural and ghosts and everything. And they would have, oh God, people like Agnes Moorehead would be on there. And
Yeah.
I've gone back and I found some, you can find them online and they're still great. I mean, they're still wonderful to listen to. You hear young actors, and the part of the butler was played by Kevin Spacey,
Yeah.
and the part of the doctor was played by Mandy Patinkin. And they were actors. This was a '70s show, right? So
Sure.
these were kids starting out in the business at the time. But I loved the CBS Radio Mystery Theater. I listened to it all the time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the word picture. Your imagination is really rolling, and you're creating at home. They're creating, but you're sitting there. You have an image, and it's beautiful. That's what drew me to radio. Although I was a sports guy, also listening to Marv Albert under the covers, Rangers
Okay.
game. But aside from that, these other things. Well, I grew up on Bob Grant, Lynn Samuels, Jay Diamond, those guys.
Yeah, yeah,
And
legend.
they if you put the content that they put out in 1988 and compare it to now, they'd never get away with what they said back then. The things that
No,
were said on New York radio back then were wild.
no, I remember Bob Grant. Bob Grant would call. There was a place in was it
The
Hoboken?
Rio Diner.
Yeah, yeah. There was a place in New Jersey where there was a big population from India, and he used to call it Currytown.
Oh, yeah.
You can't even.
Oh, yeah. He said anything.
I
And you,
know.
and you get the guy calling up, Bob, you're the best, Bob. You just what I was thinking. You just said it. They love this guy, but they steer away down that other rival station. They steer away from Bob Grant. They don't when they put they had a compilation of all the great moments on WABC through the years. They put a little snippet of Bob Grant. Bob Grant used to hold it down over there. He
Oh,
was the king of radio.
no question about it. But it changed. Look, I remember I was talking to somebody, a friend of mine on radio the other day. I was meeting with him, and I said, I remember my first time going on Imus, and Don got away with a lot of stuff that you could not get
Oh
away with.
yeah, that too. Yeah.
But I was on the show with him, and I was this theater guy. He had never really heard of me before, but his producer booked me. And he just couldn't. He was curious about my personal life. He said, "So you cover the theater?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "And I understand you're friends with Imogen Lloyd Webber, who was a regular on his show too, daughter of Andrew Lloyd Webber, a good friend of mine." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Let me ask you something. Are you dating Imogen?" And I said, "No, I'm not. She's just a friend." He said, "Well, let me ask you something else." I said, "Okay." He said, "You cover the theater. Are you gay?" And I thought, well, this is the moment, the make or break moment for me with Don Imus.
Uh,
And he flashed those, his eyebrows went up a little bit, and he gave me the look like, I'm gonna completely flatten you with this question. And he said, "Are you gay?" And I looked at him. I said, "Only when you're around the campfire, Don." And it made him laugh. And I walked out of the studio, and I got home. I got a call from the producer, and she said, "He wants you on next week." And then it
yeah.
became, I had a weekly spot on this show for 11 years.
And you know something? You didn't exactly fit the mold, whatever the mold was. You know, when you came in, I said, and I didn't know you well at that point. I said, "Who's this guy? Who is this guy? He's so different. He's a theater background. What you know?" It was very interesting, and the wide variety of guests that he had were very interesting. But he was very smart in the way he brought politics into this pop. He had a different type of program for most of his career before he started to bring in all these bigwigs
Yeah.
from Washington, and he turned that whole thing around. At first, of course, NBC, but then at WFAN, he drove that station to prominence.
He was very interesting. I talked to him a little bit about this. Not that you could talk to him about much of anything, because he didn't really want to talk to you. When you were done on the show, he was like, "Don't talk to me," because I would try to engage him after. "Hey, Don,
Oh,
what do you?"
really? He was done.
I bet you. Don't talk to me. I remember once I did a fundraiser for him. I think it was for Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, and we brought all the Broadway shows together and raised a lot of money. And he did the introduction, and then he was sitting in the green room, the dressing room backstage, and I came in to talk to him. He said, "Stop talking, stop talking." But what he did was I think he did tell me this. His great rival was Howard Stern, of course.
Yeah.
And when Howard went really, really low, although Howard does not do that anymore, but when Howard went with the strippers and the prostitutes and all that kind of stuff, Don recognized that Howard was going to beat him at the shock jock game. I mean, Don had been there before Howard, but Howard was taking the shock jock to a whole new level.
Yeah.
And Don thought, I have to do something else. And Don, in a very strange way, elevated himself to become a place where serious reporters could go on to talk about politics, but they could also, and this is, what I learned from Don, make them human, make them fun. We know Tim Russert from Meet the Press, and he's a very serious interviewer. But there's a side of Tim Russert who's a really fun, interesting guy. Let's bring that out.
Mm.
And that's what Don was able to do in a way that I tried to do it, but nowhere near the level of what Don was able to do. Because he made all these anchor people humans.
Did you hear that story at FAN? Boomer Esiason
Yeah.
got on his bad side, and Don pulls the gun on him and says, "Get out of here." And he tells that story, and people say, "Oh, come on, he didn't pull a gun." He said, and you hear his voice. He's serious, Boomer. I'm talking. He
Yeah.
said, "Oh no, he pulled the gun, and he was going to use it." Was he that cantankerous where he could turn on a dime?
Well, I have an Imus gun story. So I'm hosting Imus on Broadway, which was a fundraiser that he did yearly, and I hosted about
Mm-hmm.
4 years running. And I was backstage with him and Deirdre, his wife, and his son Wyatt. And I said, Don, you really should take Wyatt to see this show, whatever it was. Can't remember the show now. I said, you should take Wyatt to see the show. It's really good. And he crooks his finger at me as it come over here. And then he lifts his jacket pocket, and he's got the gun. He's got the gun in the holster. And he said, if you ever suggest I take anybody to a Broadway show, I'm going to shoot you dead. Hey.
He didn't care for he didn't care for the Broadway stage.
He liked the Book of Mormon. He did like the
Oh,
Book.
did he?
Yeah,
Okay.
he did. That was the one show he liked. I got him to see that show. That show he liked a lot. But no, but then I would encourage him to bring Broadway people on. And God, who was the guy from Motown? Brandon. His name was, I can't remember his last name.
Hmm.
Brandon, really nice kid, and he was great in Motown. And I said, Don, you got to have Brandon on. He's a great singer, and he's just terrific. You got him on because Don, we were on TV then, Fox Business News, and Don would sometimes have Broadway performers on to sing a song or something. So I said, Brandon Dixon, you got to have Brandon on. And he said, well, what does he do in Motown? I said, well, he plays Berry Gordy. And Don was like, well, Berry Gordy is not a singer. He was the producer. I said, I know, but it's a musical about his life. So, in
Hmm.
the case he sings it. You don't know what you're talking about. Berry Gordy was not a singer. I said, Don, it's a musical. In the musical, Berry Gordy sings. He's played by a really good singer. Okay. That's what he does. Whatever. Brings Brandon on. Brandon knocks it out of the frickin' park. He was
Mm.
absolutely brilliant. And Don is like, you are going to Hollywood. Completely. He couldn't wrap his mind around that. A musical about Berry Gordy, the star of it is going to be the actor playing Berry Gordy. He's going to have some songs done. Okay. It's a musical.
Yes.
See, they sing.
Motown. Doc.
That's right. They sing in a musical. He couldn't get it.
Well, you know what's funny? He met Deirdre at a place called Theater 22
Yeah, she
on
was an
20
actress.
on 22nd Street. She was acting. I wonder
Yeah.
how he got down there to meet her. Why was he at that theater? Is the question.
I
That's an
think back,
off Broadway house.
I think back in those days, he was probably anywhere downtown, higher than a kite, and probably
That's
on all
true.
fours, trying to figure out what block he was on at that point.
That's true. I didn't think of that. Yeah, you're right about that. Oh boy. Well, how about what's going on today? Let's touch on it. Of course, the tariffs is the big story. Just your overview.
I'm not really a tariff person. I do think free trade, if you look at the history of free trade, has been overall good for the global economy. I understand Trump's frustration with other nations that have slapped tariffs on us, and a little bit of retaliation may be in order. I think he may have overdone it. And as we see that he has started to pull back, um, I think Trump is concerned mainly about the stock market because he wants economy that's rip
Yeah.
roaring and good. So there may be some juggling here, some negotiations. I don't think it's a terrible thing for the United States not to be seen as a pushover anymore. I mean, where I'm really behind Trump, and I was saying this for a long, long time, is to get Europe to pony up to NATO because we have been carrying NATO for years. We have been paying for NATO for years. And Europe thought forever that they were going to get a free ride. And if you look in the long term historical picture, the reason that Europe has these, wonderful social programs,
Mhm.
healthcare, and you can retire at 15 years old and you never have to pay rent, and they have all this money, and all the liberals in New York and America want us to be like Europe. Well, you know why Europe can do that? Because we paid for the Cold War. They did not have to pay for nuclear weapons or a military to protect themselves from Russia.
Mm.
We footed the bill for that for 40 years, right? And that allowed them to create these social welfare systems that everybody wants to emulate because they didn't have to pay for their military. So
Yeah.
I am with him on that 100%. And I'm glad. And Europe has now stepped up to the plate, and they are paying their way now for the first time ever. So I think that's a good thing. I don't like the United States to be a pushover. I don't necessarily think we have to be the world's policeman. I do think we have to be involved and use our power to keep things calm. We don't want wars breaking out all over the place. But I think Trump's disruption of a kind of world order that was put together by a lot of think tanky people,
Hmm.
who said, "Oh yeah, we'll take care of Europe. It's okay, whatever.
Yep.
It's fine, whatever." I like that disruption. The tariffs, I'm not so high on the tariffs, but I'm also looking at my retirement portfolio.
It's
I'm
true.
not, I'm not
It's
happy
frightening.
with it.
It is a little frightening. When you turn around and you think to yourself, this has never been done in 100 years. There's a reason why these presidents steered away from this thing, and
Yeah.
he's got the balls to do it. It's pretty. I don't know if it's balls or whether it's narcissism or whether it's him trying to make the biggest mark ever, on the presidency. I don't know what's his motivation.
I mean, I do think he's got a feeling that America has been played for a patsy for a long time by much of the world. Because let's face it, we are the richest country in the world. We can foot the bill for everybody, and everybody could take us for a ride. And I think instinctively he hates to be taken advantage of. And I think, and he's not entirely wrong about this, America was taken advantage of by a lot of countries for a long time. And I think he's telling them this is not going to be the way we're doing business anymore. So you've got to step up to the plate. Now, I think if they were to strike down their tariffs, I think he would make a deal. I mean, the thing about Trump is he makes a deal. He's always looking for a deal. And and with the war in Ukraine, he was right about that. Biden's the Biden administration was terrible on the Ukraine front because they didn't give Ukraine enough weapons, powerful enough weapons to really win the war. So they gave them enough weapons to have this stalemate where people were being killed all the time. To what end? There was no solution to this war. If you're going to support Ukraine, give them all they need to knock the Russians back. They never gave them enough because they didn't want to piss off the Russians that much. And Trump is like, well, the war is here. It has to end somehow. And you know what? Ukraine, you've got to accept the fact that Russia has the upper hand right now, but we, the United States, can support you and help you to end this war and keep you an independent country, but you may have to give up some territory. Because to me, I don't see another solution. I mean, do we fund a war forever?
It's never ending.
What's
You
the
could
point
see
of
the way it was going. It wasn't going to end ever.
all? And the thing about it, you can't beat the Russians at the end of the day with that kind of thing because they have more men that they can throw into the horrible maw of grinding up young men in the war than Ukraine does. I mean, that's how Stalin beat Hitler. He had more people to throw. He had more troops to throw at the Germans.
Well, he makes big promises, and he swore those prices at the grocery store were going to go down. They really haven't gone down. The gas is pretty good. The eggs have come around. I could buy a dozen eggs for less than $15. That's always nice. But he makes those big. He shoots high,
He
and he
does.
promises high. Then eventually, excuse me, then it's going to be somewhere in the middle. How about
Yeah.
the board? How about the border? Do you think the border he's doing a good job?
Yes. I mean, I think that's why he got elected. The Biden administration, among their many failures, thought that Americans weren't caring or paying attention to the border at all. And that is certainly not true. And Trump was the first person really to bring it to our attention and to do something about it. You cannot, if you're going to be a independent, free country, you cannot have a porous border where people are coming in and we have no idea who these people are. We have absolutely no idea who these people are, none whatsoever. And he brought that to the attention of the American people. And one of the reasons he won the election the first time and then the second time is because the American people said, this is common sense. Why should we have an open border? My contention was always, I think the Democrats wanted an open border because the Democrats wanted as many illegals as they could get to the country that they could hook up on a welfare state, then turn them into voters. And as voters, they would always vote for the Democratic welfare state. I think that's.
I agree. I think it's very simple, but
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I really do. And he's getting a little backlash because there are a few isolated cases where they threw these innocent people supposedly on green cards in terrible prisons without due process. Did you hear about that?
Yeah. Listen,
I mean,
I
it's
don't.
bound to happen if you have such a heavy hand going about doing this, don't you think?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I don't think that innocent people should be thrown in jail. So
No, never.
I'm not for that. And I think, it's important that these people have lawyers and the courts sort all this out. But I know for a fact, Ralph, that a lot of the people who came across that border, they're not all these innocent, wonderful, pure people who are
definitely not
looking for a better life. So
No.
yeah, I'm all for rounding up people who are criminals and who are going to bring crime to this country. We do not need these people in our country, and they should be rounded up and they should be tossed over the border. We don't need Venezuela opening jails to send their people to us. I mean, Castro did that. I mean, we've lived through this before. That's what Castro did. He opened the jails back in the 80s and he sent all the criminals to Florida. And, that's when you had all the drug issues and how Miami fell apart. I mean, that's what Scarface, the Al Pacino movie, is all about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know what just came to me? The last time we spoke, we were afraid that Kamala, the two of us, we said everybody else was so sure Trump was going to win on that side of the aisle. They were so positive. I remember when I called you on your show a few times, I said, this is getting a little scary here. I don't know but she got swamped. boy, did she get swamped, and she did such a poor job. And do you think that well, the fact that he won so big, does that say something? We haven't spoken in a while, so I'm wondering, does that say something about his popularity, or is there a change in the country going in the other direction now? Do you see it?
I think what his victory the second time around said is that the establishment, the world that Kamala Harris represented with the mainstream media, it shows you how out of touch the Democrats, the New York Times, NBC, CBS were with the mood of the country. I mean, the journalists, especially, these are the people who are supposed to be out there reporting and finding out what's going on. They all lived in this cocoon of we're the smartest people on the planet. We know how to run the country. Donald Trump and those awful people who support him really have no place in this country. And if we can just finally defeat him somehow, indict him, put him in jail, go after his supporters, ruin his career, we can get rid of this awful MAGA populism thing, and we can go back to being the people who are smarter than everybody else, who can run the country. And they failed on every single
They did.
front. And I loved watching them fail.
I did too.
I love watching the election night coverage of CNN and those faces, and they get so
Oh,
sadder and sadder and sadder.
they were, oh my gosh. I
But
forget the guy who had a conniption on the air. What was his name again? Darn it. It was a CNN guy, and he just could not get over the fact. It wasn't one of their big wigs. It was somebody in the middle there. He
yeah,
could not get over the fact. You could read it. They're supposed to be somewhat, objective, but you could see it right on their face.
but if you think about it, the points that Trump made, the
Yep.
mainstream media should have understood. Okay, inflation was real, and the Democrats were saying it's transitory. Well, it was not transitory. It was there for 2.5 years under Joe Biden, but it's transitory. Paul Krugman, that idiot at the New York Times, transitory. And then he took to say, well, inflation's really not all that bad. Actually, here are the good things from inflation. I thought, man, you are losing it, my friend, if you're now trying to justify inflation. Borders. Nobody wants an open border.
No.
You have to be protected. Democrats and the mainstream media, oh, well, no, if Trump wants to close the border, he's being a racist because he's discriminating against, these poor Mexican people who are swimming across the Rio Grande to get here. No, he's not. He's keeping America safe from a lot of bad people who would come over an open border. And then,
Of course.
and then with Europe and NATO, yeah, you got to end the war with Ukraine and Russia. It can't go on forever. And by the way, NATO, European countries, they got to pay their fair shake. And then you get into, and this was another one, the cultural wars of, I think it's okay for a guy who wants to be a girl to play on the girls' volleyball team and spike the ball in my daughter's head.
Mm. There's a fencer recently. This woman, this female fencer. Have you ever seen a fencing match?
Yeah, I have. I fence a little bit actually in
Oh,
college.
do you really?
Yeah,
Because it's a stop and go kind of thing. Just,
yeah.
you touch and stop, and then you set up again.
And you lunge, and you move back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this woman, she actually took a knee, just like the football players used to do in protest of something else.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
took a knee and said, I'm not gonna fence against this man pretending to be a woman." And
Yeah.
that's the latest. That thing the volleyball incident was terrible.
Yeah.
Did you happen to see that It's terrible to watch. You see that video by chance?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that poor girl. And now, she has brain damage forever. And
But
they still can't see that you cannot put a man and dress him up. It doesn't matter what you do, and put him on a tennis court, on a ball court. It's ridiculous.
no, and then of course, then you had the craziness with Hamas attacking Israel, killing 3,000 Israelis, taking hostages, and then on college campuses like mine at Columbia,
Yeah.
where you have kids up there who are supporting Hamas, who
Yeah.
see Hamas as heroes, and anti-Semitism, which I know for a fact had been burbling up at Columbia for a long time, encouraged by the Middle Eastern Studies department there, which was totally anti-Israel, teaching the kids that Israel should not exist, the Jews do not have a right to be there, right? Because they're the oppressors now. That morphs into anti-Semitism. And Trump called everybody out on that. And, a lot of my old Columbia friends, we're looking at a college campus that we loved. We had a great time there at Columbia, and I'm all for vigorous debate. I took a class with Edward Said, who gave the underpinnings of the intellectual underpinnings of the pro-Palestine movement. He was a great guy, fascinating guy, controversial guy, but a wonderful, civilized man, a great teacher. You could disagree with him, but there was no animosity, there was no venom in what he was teaching. It had totally and completely curdled into anti-Semitism.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, if you had a bunch of kids in white hoods dressed as the Ku Klux Klan wanting to lynch blacks and pitching tents on Columbia's campus, do you think Columbia would have stood for that for 1 second? No.
Mm.
But, the Jews, well,
Fair game.
what did Tom Lehrer say? And everybody hates the Jews.
Yeah.
Well, that old
It's
song.
they're in solidarity with, with every, they can really come together on that one issue.
And I know
They despise the Jews.
And I know for a fact, being in touch with some of the Jewish organizations up at Columbia, those kids, they were taunted on their way to class.
Oh yeah.
Kids who were supporting Hamas. They were told you should go into an oven. Hitler didn't finish the job. That is anti-Semitism, and it has no. If you're a college campus and you're against hate speech, you got to be against hate speech across the board. You can't say, well, don't say anything about the Asians. Don't say anything about the blacks or homosexuals, but the Jews, we'll let that slide. And they let it slide.
They did. They did. And they one step down at Columbia. I think the new administrator. What do you think of her? Is she better?
No, well, the new one just stepped down the other week because she's not up to the job.
Oh, okay. So they had 2 step down, right?
2 step down. Now you got Claire Shipman. He used to be a TV news reporter, Claire Shipman.
Oh, okay.
She's on the board of Columbia. I don't know about her. I mean, a text message came out that the Post reported on where she said this whole thing about the hearings that they had on Capitol Hill about anti-Semitism. She said this is all BS. So, I mean, clearly we know where she stands on this issue too. Just going to make a quick point. The irony to me is that Columbia was always the Ivy League school that was more friendly and open to Jewish students back in the day than like Harvard and Yale and Princeton, which were the elite waspy citadels and were deeply anti-Semitic back in the day.
It's so ironic because Columbia was the haven for the Jews.
Yeah,
and they were this is New York City. It's different. Yeah, here's what you need to do, Michael. Take my advice. I know what I'm talking about in the podcast kind of thing. You go just what you're using right now, the Zoom connection, whatever you have going there, at the same time every day, Michael, whatever time is convenient for you, you get on the air, you just turn on the camera, and you have the Michael Riedel show, and you go, and you don't need anybody anymore. You do it all yourself. If you have a phone or a computer, whatever you have a show, and people are gonna watch your show. No doubt about it.
I actually prefer the interaction with somebody. I think the only person I think who really in the history of radio who could hold his own for 3 hours with no guests all by himself was Rush Limbaugh.
Mm.
Rush was unique in that sense. I prefer a give and take. I prefer debate. I prefer questions. I prefer some ping ponging going on. That's just me. And I like to have guests, and I like to have somebody that I can play off. My ego is not such that I think anyone would want to listen to me talk nonstop for an hour.
Well, then you have a different guest every day. You book some guests.
Yeah.
You do that split screen kind of thing, and you got somebody interesting. And look what you can choose from. You can have your actor friends on there, your writer friends on there, and you got a whole potpourri.
Yeah, I'd like to get a little more into going back to my showbiz roots because the politics is a little exhausting right now.
Have you seen anything good?
Tonight I'm going to the opening of Smash on Broadway, which is based on the NBC TV series. So I'm looking forward to that. The best thing that I've seen all season, and I have not seen that much. We haven't been going to that much because we were down. My wife and I were in Florida for quite a bit of the winter. The best thing out there, and you can get tickets to it now, is Sunset Boulevard with Nicole Scherzinger, the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. She is sensational. She is just one of the great performance I've seen. And that is a very underappreciated show, one of Andrew's underappreciated shows. It was never as popular as Phantom or Cats, but it has a fantastic score. I mean, those two songs, With One Look and As If We Never Said Goodbye, are just among the best musical theater songs written in the last 30, 40 years, I think. So I would highly recommend that to people. Absolutely.
No, that's good to know because, what's the one that was getting all the press recently? I had it. It just flew out of my mind. What are some of the shows that are really doing well? Do you know offhand?
Um, you've got the plays. You've got Denzel Washington in Othello.
Right. That's
Uh,
the one. That's the
yeah,
one.
selling a lot of tickets, although the reviews were mixed, very mixed, mixed to negative. Uh,
Othello. Yeah.
yeah, you've got George Clooney in Good Night and Good Luck, which again the reviews were okay, but what I took away from them was that this is a play where okay, it's about journalism is speaking truth to power and the old cliches that they use, and Morrow stood up to McCarthy, and it's all about standing up to Donald Trump. What really drives me crazy in the theater, because the theater is a very liberal place, they're always obvious in what they say.
Oh yeah.
Trump is a fascist, Republicans are Hitler, and progressives are great. And then they preach to the converted. They preach to the National Public Radio crowd. I don't go to the theater to be just confirmed in my beliefs of the world. I want to go to the theater to be shown something that I'd never even considered or thought about before,
Mhm.
where the world is actually in the theater is turned upside down for me because I've never come across characters like this. And also, I don't like really political plays because they're so obvious. And one of my, a friend of mine and one of the great playwrights was Edward Albee, who never did political plays. He said political plays are boring because all you're doing is stating a thesis. He said, I write plays about people. I hear these characters in my head. I'm not writing a political play. I'm writing about George and Martha and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I'm writing about my mother in Three Tall Women. He said, I don't do political stuff. It's boring to me. He said, I leave that to Bertolt Brecht, and I never like to see a Bertolt Brecht play.
That's a good approach.
Yeah,
Good night and good. It was a good film. That was the best thing Clooney had done before this, but I don't know how it translates to the stage. But nevertheless, well, hey, Michael, if in a couple of months you'll hear from me again. Maybe we'll do it again.
absolutely. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Ralph. And I'll take your advice. And I don't know, it'll be the Michael Riedel hour from in
I'm
his
telling you.
in his t-shirt wearing here at home.
Think about you have your you have just from every aspect of life. You have them on the program. Be fantastic. All right, Michael. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ralph. A pleasure as always. You take care.
Okay, same here. Take care.